but measures are being taken to deal with the changing circumstances, particularly on entry into the country. Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine. Daniel McConnell on the programme yesterday was telling us about plans to require COVID-19 results from people entering the country. There's more details emerging. What is planned?
You're going to have a test result from Friday, and for the first time it's recognising antigen. That's really the headline here. We required PCR tests before before the great reopening on July the 8th, and it's now PCR or antigen. The technology for doing so from airline point of view is all very much up and running already. And I would expect that you do your antigen test, upload it to your boarding pass in your mobile phone, and everything will be scanned. The people who will police it will actually be the airline initially. We've had denied boarding over digital COVID certs and things like that in airports like Malaga over recent months. So really it's up to the airline staff to make sure everyone getting on board will have their test, and obviously at immigration they'll be able to check from your QR code whether you've had your test as well.
Probably been done at the departing airport rather than on return, will it? Or will it?
It's very much the concentrations on the departing airport. What we saw Boris Johnson do on Saturday was say everyone arriving will need a test either at the airport or within one day. Doesn't apply to arrivals from Ireland. But what we've done is more or less reintroduced the regime that was there before July, with the extra that an antigen test is now recognised.
But there is something in relation to this antigen test. It has to be a professional antigen test. Yeah. But that would suggest this is not something that you can go into a chemist or a supermarket and buy your pack of antigen tests and do a self-test, doesn't it? It would suggest you're going to have to go somewhere such as a PCR centre, but you have to get a professional antigen test done by someone else.
The detail will sort of emerge on that, but you're absolutely right. The home test won't do. Will, for instance, a pharmacist test? Let's say you go into your Boots and get your test done there. Will that certified by a pharmacist? Will that suffice? They're the questions that have to be asked. And there is a facility for adding it to your digital COVID certificate. But certainly I would read what has emerged from today's Cabinet meeting, that the taking home the test and doing it yourself isn't going to suffice.
How are the airlines likely to react to this? Because not only is there extra work for them to have to do, but is there not the likelihood that a lot of people will just say, oh, well, look, if that's going to be the case, I'm not going to bother travelling?
It's going to create problems. It's going to create problems for refunds. It's going to create problems for postponed flights. The capacity, as listeners will probably know already, capacity was very much reduced over winter, and so flight prices for people trying to move around immediately before and after Christmas were very high. If you're going to have a big major disruption to travel, this really is the time to do it, because the numbers moving are very small. But there is certainly going to react with dismay, because we are showing ourselves with our Cabinet decision to be today to be pretty fragile in terms of our travel policy. Remember, we were the last to implement the digital COVID certificate in July. We didn't implement it till nearly it's up to 2 weeks after other countries. And now we've effectively applied the emergency brake procedure, which was supposed to be only applied for arrivals into the EU. We've applied it to travel within the EU. We're not the first country to do that. Portugal, incidentally, did it yesterday, and there was some dismay in Brussels that they declared a Category 2 emergency. Antonio Costa yesterday. But Portugal were obviously reacting to a very high-profile incident at the soccer match, the Belenenses Benfica soccer match at the weekend. We haven't had a case of the variant yet, and here we are restricting travel within the EU. We're the second country to do it. We're in breach of the spirit of that agreement in July the 8th that took so long to negotiate and was so difficult to introduce.
And Eoghan, there's another thing that a lot of listeners are now getting in touch about, and that is the requirement in travel with the UK. And I think this is surprising a lot of people, because they felt that in the common travel area that there weren't going to be such restrictions. And there are people worried about things like, for example, going over to football matches this weekend where it might be a day trip or they might come back the following day. Are they going to need a PCR test, go to a match and get an antigen test or a PCR test done to get back from the match?
Another dichotomy here, the Boris Johnson, for all his humming and hawing and his talk about Northern Ireland, has implemented the spirit of the Common Travel Agreement. We have not. We didn't do it with locator forms. We require people coming from Britain to fill out locator forms. They don't require it in the other direction. Now, the antigen test gets over some of the problems that you're talking about. Let's say you do your day trip to your soccer match on Saturday. The antigen test at the airport will get you home because the antigen test results show up much quicker. You don't have to do it 24 hours in advance.
My understanding is you could actually, if you're doing a sort of a day trip or an overnight, you could take the test in Ireland before your way out and use the result of that to get back into Ireland if you're coming back within the 48 hours.
Yes, and that would apply. The PCR test it has a longer life than the antigen test. But even in the case that you haven't had your PCR test taken off, you can take your antigen over there and get the result back very quickly at the airport. That's one of the joys of antigen tests.
OK, I want to bring in Amanda Ferguson, freelance journalist in the North, because Amanda, this extra layer that's suddenly within the common travel area between Ireland and Britain, that people flying into Ireland would have to produce this negative PCR antigen test, would suggest that there's a way around that they just fly into Belfast. I want to know, please clarify, does this new rule apply to vaccinated people having to take a test? It does. Even if you are fully vaccinated, you still have to show your digital COVID cert, but you also have to prove that you have had a negative antigen test within the previous 48 hours or PCR test within the previous 72 hours if you want to get into Ireland. And that's clearly because we've had so many vaccinated people who still have come down with COVID and who can transmit it to others. So there's a lot of people, and also that applies to people who've recovered from COVID as well, as others want to know. Also, people want to know about, will children have to do the test if they're getting back into the country? Eoghan Corry, do we know?
The rule before up to July was under 12. It was originally under 6, but under 12 were exempt, and I expect that to be restored.
Okay.
Over the age of 12, all those teenagers, it is a problem. They will need a test.
Eoghan Corry, thank you, and Amanda Ferguson.
By the way, your 12th birthday, under 12 doesn't mean 13, it actually means your 12th birthday.
Okay, thank you very much, Eoghan Corry. I want to bring in Liam Herrick, Executive Director of the Irish Council of Civil Liberties, because there's another issue which has emerged. It looks like NPHET wants mandatory vaccination of all frontline healthcare workers, that there are still some who have not received a COVID-19 vaccination by choice. What do you make of the potential for that? Is that something that should be required?
Well, I think, Matt, we need to see a fairly compelling case on this. Even during the worst days of the pandemic so far, we have not had mandatory vaccination as a matter of public policy, and even in the health service, which is obviously highly sensitive, it has not been a policy to require staff to be vaccinated. The Data Protection Commission issued a guidance earlier this year saying that even in terms of an